Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. I am Chris DeSantis, a little bit of a horse Chris DeSantis, and I am joined from the snowy Pacific Northwest by Joel Rollins. An early morning,
It is
Joel
an early
Rollins.
morning, and you are a workhorse, Chris DeSantis, not just a horse. So you're like a plow horse, just trudging through. You're doing a great job.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you and appreciate your attitude. And I think you had a great idea for today's podcast.
All right.
And so I want to let you introduce it a bit. But first, I'll preface it by saying, we love hearing from people that listen to the podcast. We do this for ourselves, yes, but also for you guys. And we got a reader suggestion that said, listener suggestion, I should say, that said, let's have some sort of seasonal nature to this stuff so that it maybe has some relevance to where people, the coaches that are listening to this, where they are at this particular moment. So I'm going to let you take it from there. But what direction are we headed in?
Well,
today,
I think the first part is what I learned from the last time we spoke. This is before you bumped me off for Jake. This is back beforehand. And
right.
I've taken a page out of the Chris DeSantis book. So when I used to teach first aid CPR at the university I worked at. So if I ever teach it again, I'm going to take the Chris DeSantis approach of well, what you need to do is not get cut in the first place. So if we can just go to the front of that. So that's what I'm going to do. So that whole podcast we did was just what we need is you need to start this at the beginning. So I'm going to say right now, you're in the woods, you're bleeding. There's no way we can say don't get cut. This is it's taper time. Right. You're at the meet, and let's say you got a kid here. And so again, obviously there's things that you've talked about we can lay out beforehand to set the groundwork that these won't come up. But when it got to championship time, I'd encounter a few people, few kinds of swims that I'd see a trend with. One would be I kind of called it the person that was willing to hedge their bets. Where they're putting all the chips on black, except for this pile I'm going to put on right over here. Where they automatically would be I'm all set to go. I was I'm not feeling great. Or, those blocks are kind of high, or I slipped on the block. It's they always have a little something just in case it doesn't hit the swim they wanted. So that'd be category one.
Right.
Category two is the self-analyzer mid-race. Where all of a sudden they're in the middle of the race, and whether it's a 200 or a 500, something where they have enough time to kind of think. They get in there, and I used to always tell kids, stay in your own lane, as in just swim your race, don't look around you. And so they looked around, and maybe they got pulled off their pace, and they're going a little bit faster. And then you could see them around the third 100, third 50, kind of going, it must be my training or my technique's off or so they automatically kind of laying out the foundation for what went wrong on this race, because obviously it's not going to be the time they want. And then the final one is the parental sabotage. And I had this one. We were at a meet. We were at Nationals actually. It's live streamed, and between prelims and finals, the text comes in basically is this really a sport you want to keep doing? You keep on, botching these mornings like this. And you're and the coach prefaced, the recruitment this would be really good if they could get away from their parents a little bit. And thank goodness for social media, live streaming, and the cell phone that you're never that far away from your mom. So those are the three I saw.
I know. Yeah. Okay. So let's take them one by one. And like I said, I feel like we probably could do a whole podcast on each of these archetypes, but I'm going to do my best to try to have a tight conversation about each of them. Right. And accept the limitation that you've given me, which is that you've taken
the limitation is
one hand and tied it behind my back.
We're going to do your course. We're taking your course, but it's right now. It's already championship season. I haven't taken your course yet. So just what are some Band-Aids I can put on this individual so they don't bleed to death in the woods? So starting with the person that kind of seems to always hedge their bets, whether they kind of seem to always, they're sick, they're always too hot, too cold, too many people, not enough people. There's always something that kind of kept them from giving their 100%.
Yeah, and so as I understand the premise that you're giving, and by the way, if you're frustrated with any of these situations, thank you for the plug, Joel. My advice to you is take the course, because I will show you how to prevent these situations in the future. And an ounce of prevention, as we all know, is worth a pound of cure. So, but let's accept your premise, and
There we go.
let's talk about what to do in the moment, right? I'm with you. So what you're talking about is somebody that is actively kind of distancing themselves from the result before the result even
Correct.
happens. Like I talked to somebody yesterday who, was making them walk all the way through what they were worried about going to a swim meet. And one of their fears was that they would be disappointed in how they had swim, and then they would distance themselves. But you're talking about somebody that is already like before there's a take your marks, they're pulling away. And you as a coach, you can see them like pulling away, and they're communicating it to you by coming up with all sorts of sort of like circumstances that they are helpless against before the race even starts, that will, just sort of like carry them like a leaf through the wind to a disappointing result. Right.
Yeah. And so again, you get kids all the time, of course, they're nervous or something like that. What I'm saying, the kids are just all the time. It's always something. There's always something that, I never do well in these kinds of pools. It's 79 degrees. My optimal racing temperature is 80-degree water. Like they always have one little caveat for this upcoming race. So don't get your hopes up, because this is happening.
Right.
Yeah.
So the number one thing I think of when I hear this as a scenario is I actually, as a coach, I really like this, because, and I'll tell you why, because so many times kids are struggling or worried, but the whole conversation that they're having about it is internal, right? And it's so hard to do anything for somebody who's locked everything, deep.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is at least a person who's like, they're communicating with you. They are telling you what is going on, and they're essentially engaged in an ego defense, right? They are perceiving a threat to their sense of self, right? They have their sense of self wrapped up in how well they do in a swimming race. And they're already anticipating that sense of self will be challenged or threatened in some way. They're scared, and they're like, well, I just want everybody to know that, like, if it's bad, it wasn't my fault. Like, it wasn't me. There's these, there's all these circumstances that I'm powerless against, right? That influence me. And so I think, if somebody is communicating that, first, I think, and the reason why I keep describing what's going on here is because you can't even begin to communicate with an athlete that is stressed, around taper time, unless you understand what's going on with them. Because if you don't understand what's going on with them, then you can't communicate to them like, hey, I see what's going on with you. And any attempt to do anything will likely end in a way that you don't want it to, where they go like, I tried to tell coach that I was worried and coach didn't hear me. And now I feel even more alone with my problem than I did before. Right. So it is worth spending a lot of time. And anytime I'm coaching a coach and they come with a situation with athletes, I ask them a lot of questions to probe their level of understanding of what's going on. So given this general situation, I think you've got somebody that's engaged in ego defense. They are, they're anticipating that result. They want to distance themselves from it, and that you can easily, I think most coaches intuitively know, okay, I want to help this person gain some agency to realize how much influence they have over the result, because I know that'll make it more likely that they're going to have a good result on the other end. Where I think a lot of coaches get wrong or go wrong in this situation is they themselves as coaches get into the same mind space as the athlete. So instead of being the leader and the guide, they are also like stressed and frustrated. And when that athlete brings that to them, they actually mirror the behavior of the athlete. So they will get frustrated, or they will sort of like lash out a bit at the athlete and be like, you're being totally ridiculous. Like none of that stuff that you're talking about matters. Like you're still in control. Like they'll start kind of badgering the athlete, and they're doing the same. What I mean by mirroring is they're doing the same thing. They're basically, what they're communicating is, if you don't do well, it's not my fault. Because like I told you that, none of this stuff matters, or that you shouldn't think that way, or, this is not a productive way to show up to a meet. I told you that already. So like, it's not my fault.
Right.
Okay. One of the scariest things that I have ever attempted, but I can tell you it's a lot more successful than the strategy that I just shared, is you can acknowledge to an athlete that there are, of course, a bunch of things that are out of both your control that will have an impact on whether or not they swim well. And I think if you acknowledge that first, then you've acknowledged what they're bringing with you. Then they have a sense that you get them, and that allows you to turn the corner and start laying out the vision. But hey, if we're gonna acknowledge that, we might as well admit that there are also a lot of things under your control, and get them to like. Often this is a kid who has really strong analytical skills. Like that's how they're ideating 6-7 things that are going to help them not do wrong. Give them homework. Give them the task of orienting their mind towards what is under their control. Have them start coming up with it, and don't come up with it for them. Because if you come up with it for them as a coach, then how are they supposed to get any sense of agency, right? If I go back to earlier saying they lacked agency, you have to actually like push them a little bit to say like, you can come up with it. Let me hear some stuff that you think is under your control, that you believe is under your control, that will influence the result, and turn their mind towards that. And I think that'll be really productive. It may not work. They may still go like, I can't think of anything. Yeah. But it's a far better approach than doing the same kind of ego defense.
So if I can summarize kind of a little bit here, and just to make sure I'm on the same wavelength here. So we've talked about this in the past, as far as like a lot of times when coaches, when I know I have said something that I don't feel good about later on in coaching, it's usually like, again, not to make excuses, but it's like I was, very tired or things like that. So let's just say I'm at a championship meet. You got relay entries. You got, parents dropping kids off at weird times, people missing warm-ups, people coming, in and not doing what they're supposed to do. And now you've got the one kid who's always kind of doing that. And so right away, you're kind of agitated. You have an agitated state. And they're coming to you looking for a calm kind of a thing. And you kind of, like you said, you're mirroring what they do. All of a sudden they present this, and you're just equally as frantically saying, that's ridiculous. And again, in your head, when you're saying you're ridiculous, it's kind of basically saying, listen, I trust you. You're going to do great. Everything's really good. But it's coming out as in, you're a failure. You're ridiculous. Versus in your head, right. In the back of your head, in the rational side of your brain, which you're not in at the start of warm-ups because everyone's coming at you, is rationally you're like, this doesn't make any sense. You've done a great job all year long. Of course you'll do fine. But when you say, in summary, that's ridiculous, and you're kind of agitated, you really have no idea. You have no control of the image you just projected, or even sometimes the tone that you had no intention of saying that they just heard. And so what we should do is, in a sense, create some space, maybe. And so, like, is there a way, like, to tell a kid in a sense, hey, can we just put a bookmark on this here? And I really want to talk to you about it. But right now I got to make sure that, these people are in the water going. So maybe create some space, catch that breath, understand that they're communicating with you. Because all these things normally are things that they're going through in their head that they're not articulating to anyone. Maybe not even the parents, not even saying how nervous they are. And in a sense, this is their way of saying, I'm really nervous and I'm afraid that I might not do well. And so what you want to kind of do is come at them with the questions of like, you're right, there are things that are out of our control. But what you can control are the things that you've already done. You've worked really hard this season. You've hit these paces. You've overcome this adversity, this adversity, this adversity. It's like, and I'm sure, and you can kind of, like you said, leave it to them. It's like, those are things I've seen, but what are some other things that you think you can control? And so, obviously, the great part is this is what we went into coaching for, is to help that one. The bad part is, we have 60 kids, and it's like, so now this 5 minutes, 10 minutes is 10 minutes less for that. But again, that's really what we're there for, is that idea of like, let's in a sense create some space for the moment. Like, this is a very important conversation we're about to have, and I don't want to shortchange you at this moment. And so if we can kind of create space for a second, get ourselves calmed down, make sure that we organize ourselves into, and you said you had kind of a list of questions. Are there more questions that you would kind of probe into this besides what are some things you can kind of control in this situation? What are some things that you can do? You know, do you have your playlist together? Do you have whatever it is that they have, a ritual that they might have or something?
Yep.
Are there more questions along those lines that you seem to think that would help?
Well, like, look, I mean, again, I even think what I'm suggesting in comparison to what I heard you say, you can make them come up with a lot more answers than.
So I already gave them. I already
coming
gave
up
too
with
many
answers.
answers for them.
Oh, like, yeah, like I wouldn't. I would. It's going to be probably uncomfortable, but like if you think about the scenario that you presented, you're right. Like most people, that coaches, they're showing up and they've got so many people on deck that they are responsible for in the first place. So it is already an immensely stressful situation for you. And I would say making them come up with more answers serves a dual purpose. First off, it manages your energy as a coach so that, yeah, like you're not times, 60 people having to like supply all the juice for everything. Right. Which is just a losing proposition. I think a lot of coaches, they fall into this trap. They go like, well, it's my job. I have to do it. Like I've got to do this. And then they run themselves into the ground, and then they are making a mistake that they don't want to make because they're only human beings and they can't just keep like tapping that well. But on the other hand too, like you're denying the athlete a chance for agency. So like more questions, if you pose this, more questions that I would ask, help them think it all the way through. So oftentimes when somebody is worried about something, I've noticed this about myself. I have recently finally gotten into meditation, and the insight that I've had that really drove meditation for me is that being alone with I always thought like, oh God, I'm not doing meditation right because my mind's all over the place. Like it just like, I can't clear my mind, and I had this image in my mind that I'm going to meditate and then like, I just won't be thinking about anything. And so every time I meditated, I was thinking about a ton of things and I go, I'm doing it wrong. What I found out, and this may be obvious to some other people, but I'm sharing it because I think to a lot of people it's not obvious. I talk to tons of other people who don't get it, is being alone with my thoughts, with no other stimulation whatsoever. Oftentimes, while I'm thinking all the way around, I can actually finish thinking about something, right? They can actually think something through to the end. So you have as a coach, if a kid is worried about something, they're not really just worried about whether or not they have a good 100 free or not, that there is 3 more layers or more of like stuff that they are scared of down the line, but they're not allowing themselves to think it all the way through. And in not allowing themselves to think it all the way through, in that empty space of stuff that they haven't finished thinking about, they're imagining the worst scenario. So no wonder they're scared, right? Like that's a natural thing as human beings, where we don't know something like yet, or we haven't like thought about it yet. We just naturally fill that space with like the worst possible things. And sometimes if you go like, okay, so if you have a bad 100 free, then what? And they'll go, well, then I'm going to be so pissed off because I trained so hard this year and I didn't get a good 100 free. And okay. And you go, okay, so you're going to be pissed off. And then what? Well, maybe they're going to say, to get to a question, you're going to go later, I'm going to go up into the stands and my dad's going to be so pissed because, like he takes me to practice every day and, like he spends a lot of money on this and and I go, okay, so your dad's going to be pissed. And then what? Like, keep asking them that question, get to the end of it, because and I think a lot of people are scared to do that. But at the end of all those questions, usually is something way less scary than whatever they're filling in on the other end. And just being able to think it all the way through, and just acknowledge, I'm scared of this, and this, it can take a load off. You don't have to keep circling it around. Your mind wants to complete tasks before it moves on.
Okay.
Right. So let them complete thinking about it. All the stuff they're worrying about, let them finish it. And I think people are scared to do it because one of the many psychological fallacies that just has populated the world of sports is this idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy. That is the idea that if you think about bad outcomes, they're more likely to happen. And that is actually true, but the application that people have done to it is, okay, well then we'll just not think about bad outcomes. And then there's all sorts of people that, employing that as a strategy, they end up thinking more about their bad outcome because they don't just let it finish. They don't process the whole thought, and then it just stays there. And you think about it 10 times as much as you would have if you just from the very beginning went I'm scared that if I don't do a good 100 free, nobody will love me and I'll be alone. Just let it go all the way through.
Good. And then, so if we go back to the Chris DeSantis school of you should have fixed it long ago. I think at this point, we're at in the season where you're seeing these athletes come up. It's kind of maybe as a coach, maybe I would start to mentally go, all right, this seems to be again, a common trend. What am I going to do proactively to start to keep that from happening? And also kind of the hard part is, and I didn't really notice until I fully stepped away from coaching, was starting to go what do I do to fix myself? And, we're always thinking about fixing the team rather than how do I fix myself so I don't get like this, where I don't make a snap or a sarcastic comment, or I come off with that mean mugging kind of face where you're you look angry, but you're just thinking how do I make it where I'm approachable, and so that they get the same coach in practice and the same coach in meets versus sometimes there's the intensity coach and then there's, hey, the coach is willing to sit back and listen. And then I'm kind of assuming that, well, you've seen me 100 days in a row and I'm always willing to listen. This is my one day. It's it's kind of we always think that there's we should have this huge mountain of goodwill. It's it's not that case. All of a sudden, if it's a pretty critical moment in their life and they view big meets as a critical moment, and then they came to you and you were weren't as empathetic as they were hoping, that they can pretty much crush them.
Yeah. So so to go in that direction, it's something that I've thought a lot about because, I will say for sure I'm coming fresh off of a last stint of coaching, and this was a huge challenge for me in coaching. I was responsible coach for 46 different kids, and managing my own emotional state through that, extremely challenging, right? Extremely challenging. I think a lot of coaches, at their core, they are selfless people. They want to give something. They are thinking about their responsibility, that they have a responsibility to give to people regardless. But an unhealthy way in which that manifests, I think, is that they aren't able to sort of effectively set relationship boundaries. So when you talk about hey, you kind of, some part of you expects that you should have this mountain of goodwill, or another way of that might be I feel like the kids on my team should respect the effort I've put into this, and they should be showing up to treat me differently in this moment. So often my own reflection on that is that I, as a coach, was not respecting myself. I was not respecting what I was doing. So I don't think it's actually reasonable to expect that other people that are in a relationship with you are just going to magically respect you if you don't have if you don't have that respect for yourself. So if I give an example of that, I was actually talking a couple days ago with the person who's coaching kids that we used to be the responsible coach for, because she called me up and she said like, hey, I would like some advice on how to coach this swimmer and coach that swimmer. And we were discussing through one of the swimmers, and this is a person who's for the group that they're in, they're very dedicated. They ask a ton of questions. The swimmer asks a ton of questions, and they're always sort of like, I was quite frustrated with the swimmer for a long time, because that swimmer was always going off in their own direction. Like I would have like, hey, we're doing this in practice, and I'd come over and I'd see them doing something and I'd be like, what are you doing? And they'd say something and I go, what do you mean? Like, why are you now working on your DPS? Like, I didn't tell you to do that. Like, where did you come up with that? And one of the ways that I actually think was successful that I handled this is when the swimmer would come up to me and, want to ask their 4 non sequitur questions after practice, I had enough respect for myself and what I was doing to say, I'm not going to answer your questions, because here's 1, 2, 3 things that I told you today that I think will help you to get better. And yet the action that you took in our relationship was to not trust me, and you go off in your own direction. So you're now asking me to give more in this relationship when you haven't given back the basic thing to me. And so, no, I'm not answering any of your questions. And like, this swimmer was stunned for months when I did this. Like, what do you mean you're not going to answer my question? Like, you're the coach. You answer the question. I went, I don't have to.
Yeah.
I don't have to tell you anything else right now. And I will say, over time, the way that swimmer approached our interactions changed pretty dramatically. But it only came from me having enough respect for myself to say, it's not on me to just keep like building new plans for this person because they ask me for it. I don't need to do that.
Nice. I think if we go into like maybe the second one we talk about, but this would be a great point in the whole podcast, is if we had a sponsor that we give a little shout out to that sponsor.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're going to give a shout out to ProSwim Workouts, and they have been sponsoring this podcast here for a little bit. We're really excited to have them. It's a website
short time, sponsor, long time listener and friend of the program.
Long time listener, and I actually think we're going to have Nico Messer, the man behind ProSwim Workouts. I think we're going to have him on a podcast next week. I'm going to I'm not going to bump you, Joel, this time, but I'm going to have Nico Messer on here, and he can talk some more about ProSwim Workouts. But basically, if you want to get on there and you want to get some inspiration when you're writing your own practice, I know that's something I always had a hard time with. Just like I would feel like I would get stuck, and I'd go like what, what else could I do? What else are other people doing? Can I sort of see something else and maybe sort of just change my perspective? ProSwim Workout is a great resource for that. They have all sorts of filters for you to come through and find your workout. And right now you can get a discount, and you can also support this podcast. If you sign up for ProSwim Workouts, CD Swim Coach is the offer code. And we look forward to having Nico on here as well to discuss it. All right, let's get to the next scenario.
The next scenario,
Thank you,
let's say, again, I see these athletes sometimes where, again, they would have some like race strategy they're like flawed, or they felt they should be at a certain place, or they should be up with a certain person in their lane. So like a lot of times in an LSC, for instance, it's the same top 8 kids always racing the same events. And so if one day all of a sudden the person next to them is out fast, they're like, that is a reflection on them. They're like, I must be going too slow, therefore I've got to go faster and catch up to this person. And then now it's too fast, it's out of their race parameter, and they're like, you can just see them kind of analyzing what went wrong, and they just completely start to shut down in the middle of the race. And so maybe either like something preventative, or even, again, when we talk about from our own perspective, when they come out like, Coach, I just think I don't think we did enough 50s on whatever back half racing stuff. I don't think we did enough turn work. I don't whatever it is. And so that the coach all of a sudden also doesn't become like blow up, as in like now it becomes a defensive kind of a thing where he's attacking you and you're attacking right back kind of a thing. So you've got kind of two things where I'm wondering about in this scenario. Is there a way to, like, if you see that this person's done this over and over again, is there something you can kind of do preventatively? And then what happens when they come out and they're like throwing the blame on you and you're like, well, maybe you didn't go out in a 11-2 on the first 25 of your 500. We wouldn't be in this mess.
Again, this is actually pretty similar to the first scenario to me that we're discussing. It's just the behavior on the other end is manifesting a little bit differently. So once again, you have a swimmer who, they are upset about the result that they achieved. They feel a bit under threat. Their ego is threatened. And in this time, instead of taking some sort of like environmental explanations, right? Their brain's trying to reconcile all that. They're a little bit pissed and they're going like, well, where do I put this? Well, coach is standing right there. I can blame it all on coach. And then it's not my fault anymore. Right. And again, sort of similar to where we ended things with the other one, one of the most important things I think you can do in this situation is believe in yourself and manage your own. Like, you don't have to take that from an athlete. Now, you don't have to like lock horns with them and get in a big fight. I wouldn't suggest that, right? That's not a good use of your energy, and that's not going to help them either. But you also don't have to be defensive, and I think a lot of people see their only options as being defensive or taking it. There is a third path that you can take in that situation.
Physical violence.
And
not okay. That was the 80s. I'm sorry.
Right. Sign up for a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class.
Right. Yeah,
and just look extremely menacing. And then no athlete is ever going to mess with you again. They're going to, coach, I think practice was pretty good. Good. I don't know what happened. No, I think if you're anticipating this situation and you actually do the exercise of thinking things all the way through, right? So that you don't have to search in the moment for how you're going to respond. Then the way you're going to be able to respond is, I don't know, more like akin, like you and I have young children. And sometimes your kids get really upset with you because they don't get what you want. And I've learned you can just let them know that you heard what they said, but you don't have to agree with it. Right? Like, so you can say like, I hear you're really frustrated right now. I don't agree that that's the reason. And you leave it at that. Right? You can be a bit more aggressive about it. One thing I witnessed with my old boss, Coach Paul, this is a story that has stuck with me for a long time. This is not exactly the scenario you're presenting, but a swimmer came up to him after practice and they said like, that practice was really boring. And Paul just went, I'm not an entertainer. I never thought my job was to entertain you. And he walked away. Like I was on a playground with my kids recently and, it was a day off from school. And I was telling my wife this story because I said like, oh, I think I really, I think I really upset these other two parents. They were coming up when we were talking about our kids and they go like, oh, it's just so stressful when they have a day off. Like, because we got to entertain with them. We have to play with them all day long. And I just looked at them. I said like, I pretty much never play with my kids. And they looked at me like, that's an option? I said, yeah. I just tell them like, I'm your dad. I'm not your playmate. I don't need to play with you. And they were like, what? how could you say something like that? And I was like, yeah, you can just say that. I mean, I guess the gist of some of this is you can feel comfortable staying in your lane. Like if you're confident that your training was good, you can just, it doesn't have to be a big deal that somebody's coming to you and laying it all at your feet. You can just say, yeah, I hear you. I hear you frustrated, but I don't agree. Moving
So
on.
I guess again, to kind of throw the summary here is really kind of focus on, again, the positive is that they're communicating. They might be communicating loud. They might be pointing a finger.
Sure.
But again, communicating is always better than them just kind of like, just sitting down and staring at the pool, and just sulking in it. Because at least if they're communicating and they're angry, I always looked at it as like if they have emotion, at least they still care. It's as soon as they don't care about the sport, then you're like, I don't know how to bring this one back. If someone's passionate about it, it's like you can kind of bring them back in. So communicate, validate that they're frustrated, not what they're saying. Just I understand you're frustrated,
Right.
and I get it. And then I think there's a lot we can go through, and then kind of create that space again. So again, whatever's going on, the chaos that goes on in the meet that might be within you, you're not all of a sudden projecting that back. Because what we want is as a coach,
Right.
you're like, showing strength, like we were just joking about, is not being, the jiu-jitsu champion and menacing. Showing strength is like, no matter what they're throwing at you, you're pretty calm. It's like, I'm sorry you feel that way. I know you're frustrated right now, and you're important to what you're saying here. And we're going to get back to this real soon. Make sure you get your warm down in. We'll come back and we'll talk about what we can do at this meet and what we can do at your future training. I don't really believe that that's the case. But I'm going to listen to you. Again, so you're kind of like, again, you're communicating, you created space, you validated that they're frustrated, you validated that they're important enough that you're going to talk to them. But then I think the third thing that you mentioned again, and you mentioned the first one is we want to finish this all the way through. Again, not being like, okay, well, it's just going to cut this off short here. We're going to have to, let them finish this thought through.
Yeah. I mean, like, let them, I think what you want to do is make sure your response, like I think you highlighted a really good piece of this, validates what they're saying at the other end. You can validate their emotion without validating the story they're telling themselves about why they feel that way, right? That's the move that you can do. And I was reminded of this yesterday when I started coaching. This was long before I studied positive psychology, but I was in my first coaching job. It was over the summers when I was in college and I was interning on the club team. And the head coach said, here's a big pile of ASCA talks, make them into a coaching manual. Okay. And there's one that has always stuck with me. And I was thinking about it yesterday, and I think it's relevant to what we're discussing right now. Somebody should dig this guy up, a sports psychologist. I remember his name was Tom Tutko. Okay. And he was giving a talk, and he was talking about a basketball player. This guy was, he had worked with a team, and this guy on the basketball team, he was like this big, imposing, hulking 7-footer center on the team. And the coach came to Tutko, and he was like, I got a problem with this guy. This guy is physically like he could dominate every game we're playing in, but he's so passive, right? And he's shrinking back from contact with other players. Smaller players are playing more aggressively with him and getting the best of him. Like, what do I do? And I'll yada yada over a lot of piece of this. The solution that Tutko came up with that I've always thought about was he told the player, and he had the coach get in on this. He said, I want you, whenever you're real frustrated with coach in practice, I want you to just let him have it. And there was these descriptions of the player getting frustrated at practice and just lobbing expletives at coach, right? He was just giving it to his coach in practice. And I think so many coaches would be like terrified to do that, right? Because they're worried like how it's going to make them look that somebody is going after them that hard. But the thing about this player was when you're passive and you're shrinking in, chances are you are experiencing really intense emotions at a lot of points, but you're not letting them out. And so all of that emotion gets turned inwards negatively, and it manifests itself as passivity in situations. So it is always better if you have, like, I would prefer a kid coming in and telling me I'm the worst coach in the world and it's all my fault and my practices were shit and that's why they didn't swim well, to somebody coming up and just sort of meekly going like, that was bad.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. And walking away to the warm up pool. I take it 10 times out of 10, the scenario you've presented.
I always, I kind of joke with my friends a little bit about this, but it really wasn't a joke at all. It was the idea, like, again, we want these kids to be like, hunters. We want them to get out there and get going. And yet in practice, it's like the coaches will never lose an argument. Again, it's like, well, I don't want to create lapdogs. I don't want them obedient and just kind of sitting down and be like, I'll just sit down and listen and nod my head and just wait for the kibble. Like I want the dog that's just going to go out and like the steak on the table and taking that steak. It's kind of like, not a great analogy, but it's kind of what I was thinking. Is like, again, it's like you want someone that's going to go out there and take something, that's not going to settle for things. But yet if they're in practice, they're always kind of like, you just kind of lost that argument. You're going to do this set. You're not going to have any kind of, again, we have so many kids that we need structure, but yet again, like kind of to tie it back in with the whole playing with the kids or being the entertainer is like, we take care of all the structure. We take care of a friend of mine calls it enter training. We're like, it's not just training. You have to create an entertaining little variable within it. And then we're doing all,
and you're juggling on the sideline and doing a little dance.
We're the conversation,
like,
we're this, we're that, versus like, get after it. Kids are yelling, that's great, get after it. Again, allowing that emotion to be part of it because you want that emotion. But then don't be surprised when that emotion comes out and it can come off as negative. And instead of saying this is negative, viewing emotions are what I want, communication is what I want. Even if it's loud communication, I'll take loud communication over sullen acceptance of defeat.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's do the last scenario. I think we're going to have time.
Let's say, like, again, this is just one scenario, but I've talked to lots of coaches. We have parents, like, again, maybe it's just one parent in there who just either doesn't understand sport or just doesn't understand that there's going to be adversity. So, like, this one athlete, again, live stream, just all of a sudden gets the text. You sure you should do this sport anymore? It's like we're at nationals. She's pretty good at the sport. We don't need to go through the analysis of how good she is in the sport right this second. But then on a lower level too, you'll hear it all the time where, just the ride home, like you didn't do this very well, you didn't do that. So again, you're trying to be the positive force, trying to keep them going, and yet at home. And what I've always told people is like, I don't want to tell someone how to parent. If that's their parenting style, it's not my parenting style. But again, I'm not going to say your mom's wrong, your mom's crazy, whatever it might be. It's again, what are we going to do to set up an environment where they can be successful, even though, maybe what you see, and we could be wrong. I mean, we're not geniuses. Maybe what you see is like, I don't know if this strategy is going to really help your son or daughter.
I mean, so I think again, number one step, understanding what's going on. And I think, for instance, I have seen a lot of really good stuff coming out of a swim coach that I think a few people have heard of. He's is named Eddie Reese.
Let me jot that down.
And one of the things, write that down because he knows a thing or two. But I've seen a lot of stuff where he talks about how overwhelmingly negative the environment for a lot of young people is right now. And therefore, he knows that sort of part of his core mission is to counterweight that by creating a extremely positive environment in his swim practices, in the course of people participating in the sport of swimming, in order to sort of counterweight against that. Now, that's a lot easier said than done, right? Because a lot of that negativity is pressing down on us as coaches as well. But if you start from the premise, like you go, my perception is this kid has a really negative environment at home around sports, then one of the things you should know from the very beginning is applying, like you're not going to be able to out negative the situation at home. Like that toolkit for the most part is out of your hands. Like, I even in the situation I described earlier, that same swimmer was showing up late to a lot of practices, and my perception was that his parents were extremely hard on him, but I made a mistake anyway. My solution to getting him to come to practice was I just went around him and I talked to his parents and I said like, hey, he's not showing up on time to practice. And they were like, I knew I'd made a mistake because I got the email back. The parent were like, we had a talk with him and we let him know, like that it is totally unacceptable that he's doing X and Y and Z. And like, I could tell they had come down really, really hard on the kid. And ultimately, like it didn't create sustained change because the kid was earlier for a little bit because he was scared. He was remembering that painful interaction with his parents, but it didn't sustain motivation to change stuff in the long term because eventually like all of us just get worn out by overwhelming negativity and we just sort of like hunker down, rewrite, and you sort of like go into yourself and you start disassociating until you really just don't care anymore about what's happening. So I think understanding that and providing that counterweight against it. Another pitfall, and I guess I know I'm dancing around giving some advice, but I think that there are solutions that people come up with that are not the best solution, and I want to address them in the course of this. Another solution that I think people go to is, they'll kind of put the kid in the middle and they will start like contradicting, right? You don't want to tell anybody that they're a bad parent. What you definitely don't want to do is tell a kid that their parent is bad, right? And then because with the situation you're putting them in is really unfair, that now they've got the parent on one end and you on the other end, and like they have to choose, right? Who's right or who's what. What you might want to do let them do is give them, again, we've used this term a lot, give them some space to where they can speak out loud and communicate a little bit about what kind of negativity they have, what kind of negativity they're experiencing, and what
do you mean by that? If you can kind of keep going, so like what kind of negativity they have? Do you mean
so
that
like you said,
or the negativity that they're getting from their parents?
Well, even the scenario that you presented, like the only reason you knew about the text message that was sent in the course of the meet, I'm assuming, is because the kid showed it to you and was like, "This is happening right now." So, in my mind, you should give yourself a pat on the back if you're finding yourself in that scenario, because already the kid at least feels comfortable just like showing it. And you can listen. The hardest thing to do, I think, is listen in that moment and not be judgmental, because like instantly you're going to be like, that is such a shit text message to send to somebody when they're in the middle. Like, how could you do that? You just have to go like, just ask some open-ended questions like, wow, like, how'd you feel getting that?
Yeah.
Like, what are you thinking about after getting a text message like that? And just give them at least somebody to, again, process what's going on and think all the way through. And you just listen and, even back to them. You don't have to provide any analysis. You don't have to provide any critique. You can go like, well, it sounds like, you thought, or you felt like that was a pretty upsetting text to get during the meet. And they'll be like, yeah. You can just leave it at that. It's a huge win if you've made it to that point. I think because you've expressed basic human empathy for somebody else.
One thing I think, embarrassed just thinking now, is like, again, like you're saying, instead of going the confrontation, like, well, that's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. You're blah, 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 blah. We always talk as coaches about, preparing them for life, and so the idea here is, again, even if this is a national meet or whatever meet, that's not the important thing. Was that second swim or whatever they have coming up next? The important thing is that they were able to kind of talk through something that actually will help them later in life. Something where they can go, okay, this is happening. What am I going to do to move forward? Versus, how do I get a good swim out of this? How do I turn this into like, oh, I'm going to seething anger into a great race or whatever? It's like, no, it's like someone actually cares about you. Someone gives a crap what you have to say, and let's let's get through this somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't want to, I mean, you can have a confrontation about that, but the only person who you should have a confrontation about is a parent, is the parent who's sending the text message. And I think that's like a very, very much a judgment call that you have to make. You definitely, I would not advise you to
That's
do
a whole
it
nother
in the middle
podcast.
of a championship meet.
Yeah.
Like, just, you can file it away for later. You have a couple different directions you can go to it. Chances are that's probably a parent that is going to be confrontational with you at some point. And at that point in that conversation, I think it's totally appropriate to bring up like, hey, I saw you did this and I don't agree with it.
So kind of
in a very
prioritizing,
confident way.
You're prioritizing, like right now, the most important thing is the emotional well-being, not the swim, the literal emotional well-being of your athlete at that moment, and get them through that. And that's
and picking a fight with their parents will definitely not help.
So the win is they've confided in you, that they communicated. The second part is if you can just get them through this moment emotionally and let them start to kind of, do their own analysis, their own interpretation, not you again, telling your kids what to do. Like, you're going to play on this structure for 5 minutes. You're letting them work out their own stuff. Let him or her work out their own thing a little bit. You're there again, not getting out of your own lane, but just like acknowledging it, letting them talk it through, letting them come up with something else, or not coming up with anything, but letting them kind of talk through, and then get back in your lane. And again, that's the win. If anything comes out and they have a great performance, that's about pretty far down the food chain as far as like importance that day. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, before we close this one off, I guess I'm going to turn the tables on you, because you've been so great. You've been asking me questions this whole time. But like, as you listen through all of this, like, I guess, what is some stuff? I mean, you've been a coach a long time, and I think you've had some pretty good championship meet results. I mean, I was reminded recently, I've teased you so many times on this podcast. You had the first woman to swim under a minute on a 100 breaststroke split in Division III. Like, that's a pretty good result at taper time. What's some stuff from taper time that even now, as you have some distance from it, that you reflect on, that you would tell to other people?
The funny thing is, actually, not to be like, oh, that one swim we had, for her to do that swim, she actually was, she quit swimming about 10 seconds before that race. She was in the car, a collegiate athlete, and she's like, I'm going home. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I'm done. And like, cause like some kids was me.
Okay. Now we need this story. So what did you say?
So it was like one of those things where like,
yeah. So what did you do?
We kind of you just kind of did the same thing. We just sat down, nodded your head. Cause it's one of those, again, we're like, sometimes you're just in such disbelief that like, I can't believe this is what. You're like, where's that camera? Isn't that a little early for Ashton Kutcher to be out here with the punked camera? But again, it's one of those where I always thought that the part I was pretty decent at was, it was just kind of like listening to someone kind of go. And I always appreciated the emotion of the moment and emotion of like what all is going on. I mean, there's so much overwhelming. I mean, the lights are bright. It's too hot. There's all this noise. There's all these things that just are normal, agitators, to your nervous system. And now you've got this race and this and this and this and this and this. And so just to kind of get someone to like, again, in that situation, like, I knew there was nothing I could do to fix it. And so I could listen, because it was like, we're already at ground zero. There's nothing we can do. And I just basically said, it's like, this is one of those points in your life where you can either let other people, dictate what you're going to do next by making you feel insecure about this, or you can kind of take ownership and be like, I've worked way too hard to let someone push me around. I'm going to show them what I can do. And I said, it's on you, and I'm going to support you the direction that you go. Just, give me a heads up if we need to pull you from the relay, just to be fair to those other women that are going to swim with you. But, I'm here for you. You do what you need to do. And if this is the last meet, it's been nice working with you this far, and so that luckily worked for her.
Yeah.
And again, it was rolling the dice. Like, I came up came up with a 7 on that one, but it could have easily been like, great, Mom, we're out of here. And that was the last we would have seen her too. So yeah, it is. It is. It's an emotional ride on all those. And I think, like you said, is the big thing is if they're communicating no matter what is all that you really need to do. And you just kind of keep them talking. And kind of as you were mentioning, like letting them talk things through, I would always be like, okay, so then in the end of this, you're going to get hydroencephalitis and your head's going to fill with water and you're probably going to explode. I see where you're going with this. And so just kind of point out the ridiculousness. But that was the kind of relationship I had with a lot of the kids was like, I could point out how ridiculous it was getting. And then they could stop and go, yeah, maybe this isn't terminal cancer. Maybe this is just a bad swim. We'll be okay.
Right. Just a bad 500
Yeah.
free. I mean, what I hear in that story though, Joel, that I think is powerful, that I think people should really listen to, is you're right. Like we've talked about it so many times in this podcast, the stuff about the nervous system, and you have this incredibly stimulating environment. And then you have this event that people are anticipating that is emotionally, like it has so much weight, and that in itself is just, they're literally overstimulated, right? They're what they're communicating is, this moment right now, I am overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed by what's going on. And if you, as a coach, if you can potentially, while they're communicating this to you, come with a different energy that says, whatever it is, the words that actually come out of your mouth. But if your energy is, I know you're really overwhelmed right now, but I'm not overwhelmed in this moment, right? You actually, like, you enter a shared space together, and it allows their nervous system to go like, oh, maybe everything's not that overwhelming. Right. Like maybe it's going to be okay for a second. They can just like come out of it for a second. Mm-hmm. Right. And that allows them to show up in a different way on the thing that they're trying to do. Because if we go back to all these other podcasts, I mean, I think the theme of this is that, when your nervous system is in the proper orientation, I don't know the right way to describe it, that's where you can get the best possible performance.
Also, the video also is paused and the dramatic. I'm going to have to listen to the podcast to get to the conclusion. Yeah. One thing I was also thinking is kind of along these same lines was like how you were assigned to like read every ASCA manual and come up with it. When I worked for Milton Elms for a little bit, and his thought was, here, Joel, I want you to read this book on swimming and kind of get back to me on it. It was Don't Shoot the Dog, a dog training manual. That was the only book he ever gave me to read. It's more of a pamphlet, but it's really good as far as understanding reward structures. And one thing that I got out of it was the idea, like, if you got a huge dog, you got a pit bull or something like that, and he's aggressively going forward, your initial reaction is aggressively pull back. And that dog's going to pull harder forward, and you're not going to overpower that. And so the manual said what you do is you jerk the dog a little bit to the side, not like you're trying to break its neck or hurt it. You just tug it a little bit to the side, and all of a sudden the dog just kind of goes, what? Why am I going left? Right. And that's what I always thought with this too, is anytime a kid comes at really hard emotion, if you come back hard emotion, it's like you're pulling that pit bull, and it's going to escalate where, either way, either you win by you pulled that dog back so hard that they're not the dog you wanted, or they've won and now you're not the coach you wanted to be. It's like the idea was like, hey, why are we here? Why is this going on? And that little left jerk of the chain is enough to kind of pop them out of that emotional state. And let's get into like a rational frame. Like, geez, let's kind of take a moment and look at this. Yeah. Yeah. A little bit of disorientation sometimes can help as well. All right. Well, I hope there's a lot of really good tips in here for people that are in taper time. Sorry to all the college coaches. You might have to sift through the analogies, but it's in there. No, no. It's all gold. It's all gold. Sorry to all the college coaches who already had your conference meet, but maybe you're listening to this too and you go, gosh, now I have an idea of what I'm going to do. Or gosh, I should enroll in the Chris DeSantis classes. Yeah. I heard that those are filling well. Yes, and for $210, gosh, that's kind of a bargain for the kind of stuff we're talking about here. If you like what you're hearing at the podcast,
I can guarantee you, we haven't even discussed 10% of what you're going to get out of the course. So there's so much more in there. There's so much more for you guys. I'm really excited to do it. I'm going to be bringing Nico on, as he's another person who's signed up for the course. We're going to have a bit of a conversation, and I always love talking to him. That's coming up soon. You go to chrisdcoach.com. There's a new website coming here within the next few weeks. It's still going to be chrisdcoach.com, but it's in the process of a full redesign. Instagram, chrisd_coach, CD swim coach on Facebook. Subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Watch the YouTube version if you're one of those 50 people that for whatever reason wants to listen to this, and leave a comment and have a conversation with us. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. Tell us what you'd like to see in the future. As you have heard on this, we take feedback, or at least Joel does. And then he's sort of like, he beats me over the head with it until we decide to put it on the podcast. And that's what I like about him. So thank you, Joel. Thanks. And thank you to everybody for listening. And we'll see you again soon.